Hey guys, it's Kwana back again with another review and a recap. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about Ms. Marvel. Ms. Marvel is the newest MCU released show on Disney Plus streaming platform, and this show is all about a 16-year-old Pakistani American girl who is a Marvel fan. She's an Avengers fan. She lives in the world of the Avengers, so let me not say she's a Marvel fan, right? She's an Avengers fan, and most importantly, she is a super fan of Captain Marvel. She lives in Jersey City, and she develops her very own superpowers and gets to be, in her words, a superhero who just happens to be a brown girl. This show is a part of the MCU. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to come to you in this video and talk a little bit around this show, kind of recap the first episode, tell you what I thought about it, whether you should watch it or not watch it, and kind of talk a little bit about some of the backlash that this show has gotten. So before we get started, do me a favor and click that subscribe button, because I'm going to be recapping each episode of Ms. Marvel, and follow along, because so far only the first 2 episodes have been released to reviewers and critics. So no one really knows where this show is going to go, where this show is going to land. And really, I feel like for any of the Marvel shows, you really can't properly rate them until you get to the end, because there have been shows that have gotten tons of critical acclaim, like WandaVision, that started off really, really strong, and a lot of people weren't really happy with the way that it ended, or felt like the direction of the ending didn't really stick the landing. Same thing with Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So you really can't say where this show is going to land. And unfortunately, it's getting a ton of negative review, and it's right now, I think, the lowest reviewed of the MCU shows. And that's okay if those reviews are fair and unbiased, and just looking at the show and viewing the show for what it is and for the category that it belongs to, and not trying to rate it or judge it in the category of the films. Does that make sense? Now, so if you are a breather, so I've watched the episode twice, and I have lots of thoughts, but I want to start by just telling you my initial reaction to the film, or to the show, to the first episode of the show. The first episode's runtime is 49 minutes. I kind of wish they had cut it down just a little bit, because I do wish that it felt more like a 30-minute show for teens, because I think that teen shows typically are in that 30-minute zone. However, I really enjoyed this first episode. Now, full disclaimer, I am a Marvel fan, but I've also seen each of the other teen properties that are the live action properties that belong to this universe. Now, before any of the hardcore fans come and attack me, let me say this. This is the first that belongs to the MCU, that is under the full-on direction of Kevin Feige, really belong to the MCU, and will be incorporated, that we know of, into the films. Now, there have been other properties that have come out since this MCU run has begun, right, with the very first Iron Man. There have been The Runaways, which was released on Hulu, had 2 seasons on Hulu, and there was also, was it 2 seasons or 3 seasons? 2 seasons on Hulu. And there was also Cloak and Dagger, who, if you've been with my channel for a while, you know that I loved Cloak and Dagger. It was one of my favorites. Cloak and Dagger, which was released on the Freeform. Some of you might not know Freeform. It used to be ABC Family, now it's Freeform. And it was released on the Freeform platform. And I'll say that those are the 2 of the live actions that belong to this younger fan base. And I feel like in order to properly judge Ms. Marvel, I have to judge it against those. I can't really judge it against WandaVision. WandaVision is its own entity. It feels like its very own thing. Same thing with Loki. Same thing with Falcon and the Winter Soldier, although because this is based in the real world, or the Earth 616 version of reality, that lives in, it feels closest to that. But I really feel like you have to judge it against Runaways and Cloak and Dagger. And even those were geared toward older teens. And the problems that those teenagers were dealing with were much more sophisticated. And I felt like they were trying to appeal to an overlapping demographic with those. They were trying to appeal to the teen audiences, but also the young adult audiences, but also the Marvel comic book fan audiences. And because they hadn't really given the credence to be MCU properties, they were trying to stay true to what was happening to the in the MCU without being able to say that they were MCU properties. And if you've not watched those, I highly recommend Cloak and Dagger. I think Cloak and Dagger was really well done. My heart broke when they decided to not renew Cloak and Dagger, because I thought that the way that that show was done was really well done. I really, really enjoyed it. Yeah, it could have benefited for some better CGI, but for the writing of the show and the acting of the show, I thought that it was really well done. Runaways was well done, but a bit campier. And I think this kind of lives in like the in-between, right? So for those of you who haven't had an opportunity to watch the show yet, it plays with elements of magical realism. The Miss Marvel character, the girl who becomes Miss Marvel, Kamala Khan. She is a Pakistani American teenager. She's 16, and she perpetually lives with her head in the clouds. She's very imaginative, and so the show and the direction and the cinematography and the CGI plays with elements of animation, especially comic book animation, graffiti art, things of that nature that appear on the screen to conceptualize the imagination of this girl. And she's dealing with problems that teenagers would face, like searching for and finding her own identity, dealing with really a lot more family-based drama than any of the other shows. I think I don't see where this show is going to lean as heavily into the supervillain type of combat or conflict. I think this is going to live in the space of just her trying to reckon with her family. And then we'll see that element of her when she shows up in the Marvels, when that film is released. So in that regard, I think that this show is doing something that's very beautiful. It also feels authentic to who this character is supposed to be. She's a 16-year-old girl. Those of you who have seen Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness got a chance to meet America Chavez. America Chavez's character is a young girl, and she's very playful. She brings like a very lighthearted, playful element to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, but she's already dealt with some heavier stuff. She's already been through some heavy loss, and Kamala just hasn't. She hasn't had that heavy loss. She's just a young girl who loves Miss Marvel, who is quirky and different like most Marvel fans, and this feels like them trying to pay homage to that element just as much as they are trying to bring a very authentic Desi character to the screen. And for that, as a very quirky young girl who liked all kinds of things that people thought that a brown girl in the South should not have liked, I appreciate that. Now, I think we're going to get some of the same arguments that people made about Turning Red. Oh, I don't understand. I don't relate to this character. And it's like, at some point, we're going to all have to get off of this soapbox of, if I don't see the character that looks like me, I can't relate. I just saw Hustle this weekend. I'm not a 6'9" basketball player from Spain, but I could relate to the character. I am not a basketball middle-aged man sports agent in Philadelphia, but I could relate to Adam Sandler's character. And so people are expected to show up for those films, to support those films, to like those characters, and I think that we can do that. I really enjoyed the first episode. I think the first episode did what it needed to do. We got small glimpses of her life and what her life is probably like at school. We got a lot of focusing on her and her life and her family. And we got some of her glimpses, some minor glimpses of her friendships. I will say that something about the pacing was a little off, and that's why I said I wish that they had found a way to trim it down just a smidgen. Not because it ever got boring, but because it didn't feel like they worked the 49 minutes that they had enough. Like, we really saw maybe 3 minutes total of her in school. And if that's going to become a major setting later on, we should have gotten more time there. We got a lot of time with her and kind of like her family and in the community, and kind of trying to understand the dynamics of her relationship between her and her mom, where most of the conflict's going to probably come in for her life. And then also her friendship with her best friend Bruno, who helps kind of make gadgets for her and is a potential love interest for her. Aside from those glimpses, though, really just getting the sense of who she is as a character. And so I don't mind that they spent more time of just really getting this, but they spend so much time hammering the idea of like, she has, her mind is in the clouds and she's this girl who's not taking life seriously. And of course, I think part of the premise of the show and part of the lesson of the show is going to be that she's 16. Why does she have to? Why does everything have to be a monumental crisis? Yes, that is a part of life, but there's also just the quirky, fun-loving times of life as well. And so for that, I adore this show. Now, going into a recap, so this is where I'm going to get some spoilers. So if you have not had a chance to watch the show and you're interested, a couple of quick things, and I'm going to be writing about this in my review of this show, episode 1, on Common Sense Media. I usually post on there as well. Right now, the rating for this is TV 14. I don't know what's coming that makes it a TV 14. In the first episode, I did not hear any language that was bad. That would be bad for younger viewers. I think that I would probably say 8 and up, 10 and up. Maybe there's some thematic things that she's going to deal with later that would make 10 and up more appropriate. But I feel like my kids who are 8 years old and up could watch this with no problems. She just briefly mentioned like how she could be doing something worse than what she is, and then she briefly mentions cocaine is like the worst thing she could be doing. And so for that, you know, if you have young kids who don't know what cocaine is, that might be like, what is cocaine? And you might have to say something along the lines of, well, it's a type of medication that's not good and not made by doctors, and people take to self-medicate, and they should not, and it's very bad. Aside from like that kind of discussion, there's really nothing else in this first episode that I felt like was triggering or bad or referencing anything negative. So I felt like this definitely could be watched with a younger child in the room and they would be okay. I have not seen the second episode yet, though. So for those of you who've already had an opportunity to review this first and second episode, you might find that I'm wrong on this, but I do feel like TV 14 is, I mean, it's fine. I think it could be even lower. I think that this could have been TV 7. Like, I've seen this so far, it seems comparable to stuff that my kids have watched at 8 years old. All right, so there's that. So that's, and I enjoyed it as a mom, as an adult. I enjoyed it. So there you have it. Now, going into some quick spoilery things that I noticed. One, I love the fact that they're getting into the idea that the source of her power is from this bracelet, this heirloom passed down by her grandmother. I do think they're going to go into and connect it to her comic book beginnings, but I like the idea that they're trying to say, you know, this is because she's not born with this power, that it shows like what happens when someone who is coming of age gets this power. It really makes me think of like X-Men or X-Men Evolution, because those of y'all from the 2000s, y'all know about some X-Men Evolution. That was my show. Okay, really dealing with like people getting this power as they're coming of age, right? But also, I do think they're going to connect it to the actual comic book backstory of her family perhaps being connected to the Inhumans or to the Kree. There's definitely a moment where she puts on the bracelet and it seems very much like the people in the background, like she visits like an ancestral plane or something where perhaps people are from like the Kree or they're Inhumans or something like that. So I like the idea that they're going to play with that, but we don't really have a full-on reveal. But I will say this. So she finds the bangle early on in the episode, and then at the end of the episode, we see that the bangle has this power. And her mom definitely is aware of what this bangle can do. She's not aware that her daughter has used the bangle yet, but she's definitely aware because her immediate instinct is, no, take this box of things and go put it in the attic. And she does that immediately, even though initially she's like, oh yeah, this is just some things she's passing down, and she's expecting it to be just this junk jewelry, and then she sees this and she gets big eyes. So I'm really interested in seeing like how they're going to connect the mom to this, and perhaps getting into like the backstory of this power source and perhaps how it's been used by other women in her family. And I love the idea that perhaps this has been passed on in the women in her family, because I think that goes in perfectly with, I'm not going to use the word feminist, but kind of like the female-centered energy that you get with Captain Marvel and that you get with Monica Rambeau. Of like, we've seen other aspects of weaponry and power being passed down from like father to son, or from man to another man in the Marvel universe. You know, you think of like Howard Stark creating the shield that becomes Captain America's shield. You know, you think of the men in Wakanda, mostly because they've not shown many females yet, but the men of Wakanda passing on the mantle of the Black Panther, that kind of thing. So I love the idea that this is connected to the women in her family, and perhaps we'll get some glimpses of that. I also like the idea that perhaps this can become a series that they come back to, like whatever happens in the Marvels, that maybe we'll come back to this and we'll deal with new issues. So whatever we're going to deal with in season 1, that maybe we'll get new issues that she'll be dealing with in season 2. I love the idea that we get to see it set in a very real world. You see these kids kind of feel like they're down on their luck, or like, oh, we're from Jersey City. Oh, this city, this bike's not going to be there. I love those little notches. Also, her and her driving test. I love that, although it borders on stereotypes, on stereotypical things. But let's face it, like a lot of kids have really bad first driving tests. So I like the idea that her being a bad driver is not connected to her, although it could be connected to like her not like being grounded, but it's also connected to like the relationship that she has with her parents, that they kind of just expect her to be naturally good and be capable of doing certain things. And so perhaps they didn't really structure her. Like when her father is talking to her, he's like, look around, just pretend like you're looking around, instead of like actually like looking around to make sure nothing is coming, right? Like they're giving her this advice, but the advice is grounded on like not actually doing a good job, like not actually knowing the skills, but just pretending to know the skills. I was a little confused at first with like the friendship dynamic of like, and I think they're going to eventually develop the friends group into like a 4 with this girl Zoe. But I was like, oh, wait a second. Okay, is this going to be like a love interest, like Kamala and Zoe are going to be a love interest, or is it going to be Kamala and Bruno? But then I picked up that Zoe must have been a friend of Kamala's, and then they fell out because she got really super popular. And so this first season is going to really deal with like Kamala perhaps getting some popularity and fame and how she deals with it, especially being this quirky girl on her own. So I really liked that dynamic. And they kind of come back to it with like her saving her at the Avenger Con. But yeah, I just, more than anything, I just feel like she's such, just the character in and of herself is just such a nod and homage to fans, that it does kind of suck that some fans aren't on board with this. I really think that people, especially adults, should take off their mantle of thinking that just because it's an MCU property that it has to be geared toward adults. This is a great vehicle for people who haven't really shown MCU stuff to their kids, like me, to introduce their kids to MCU stuff, and then as they get a little older, then they can graduate to maybe some of the little bit more violent stuff that is in the other MCU properties. But I really enjoyed this show, guys. This first episode, I thought it was really well done. I loved how they did like the magical realism elements with like using the comic book elements to bring that onto the screen, how they did the split screen with her and the counselor, the graffiti art that was like illustrating her conversation with Bruno as they were imagining what her costume should look like. And even when they were texting each other and like the word hug appears on the screen, and then the lights of the bodega, or it shows one of the messages that they deliver back and forth to each other. I loved those elements. That really grounded it as like a young adult or a teen show. And I think that's okay, guys. I think we have to stop judging things as adults only. So if you have had an opportunity to watch Miss Marvel, what did you think about it? Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What were your thoughts? Where does this rank? I'm going to stand firm on, I don't think that you can rank this with the current MCU shows. Although I will say, by the time we get to the end, if it sticks the landing, it could get higher than, in my opinion, in terms of execution than some of the other MCU TV shows. I didn't really talk about the Netflix ones because those are really in their own lane with being like the rated R ones, the Defenders sagas that kind of connect together, and those were just recently released under parental advisory on Disney Plus, but those are completely their own thing. But I also think that with the exception of Daredevil, none of those really stand up to anything that's been put out on Disney Plus so far. So I definitely think that so far this is looking to be very promising. So those are my thoughts around Miss Marvel, guys. Let me know what you think down below in the comments, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Toodles!